Hello and welcome to yet another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. Today, Francis is off, probably for something Disney related. I didn't ask him.
Something Disney related.
Francis respects the House of Mouse, let's be perfectly honest. And I figured I'd reach out to friend, Trash Future co-host, and studio co-occupant Milo Edwards to join me.
Hello. Yeah.
Milo is
your
not
podcasting cellmate, Milo Edwards.
Exactly. Milo is not just representing the Trash Future podcast. He also represents the new Seinfeld podcast, Masters of Our Domain, and a Russian podcast called Too Much. If you like Russian jokes, you can listen to him on that too.
Yeah, if you want to listen to my Russian podcast, it will really validate the amount of work I put into that podcast for no reward whatsoever.
I also love the idea that if the crazy centrists just had the wherewithal to figure it out, they could much more credibly accuse you of being a Putin plant because you do a podcast in Russian, and for all they know, those jokes might be like things that your FSB masters are telling you to make jokes about. If they didn't listen to them and realize that it's you and Olga singing "Owner of a Lonely Heart," but just finding a way to make it about getting sucked off.
Yeah, exactly.
So Milo is here today because, well, I was going to talk to Francis about the whole Tom Cotton controversy, which is not really a big controversy. It's more just like some dumb shit, and it got misinterpreted and kind of hyped up. It's funny, but it's not really that big of a deal, which is Tom Cotton claimed to be an Army Ranger in his campaign literature when he was running for Congress in like the 2000s, before he became a senator from Arkansas. However, he was not technically an Army Ranger. He was a graduate of the Ranger School, which I'm also a graduate of Ranger School, which it could either mean one of two things. Either you can either think, wow, Nate, that's so cool, or the obvious answer, which is clearly it doesn't really mean that much if Nate has it. But Cotton did not serve in a Ranger unit, which is to say the 75th Ranger Regiment, which is a unit you have to try out for, and he just wasn't in the Army long enough to go in as an officer. You have to successfully complete a period of time in a regular unit, you have to be Ranger qualified, and then you have to try out for it and get selected, and like not that many people.
You never met the minimum Ranger requirements, like doing pull-ups at your wedding or whatever it is.
Yes, yeah. Of the people I know who have been in Ranger Regiment, doing pull-ups at your own wedding is 100% a thing that they would, because I don't want to libel anybody, would do.
Libeling like Rangers as a concept. Like you get a class action against you for, this man implied that all Army Rangers love shooting their coffee grinders. That is only some Army Rangers.
Hilariously, the guy who shot his coffee grinder wanted to be in Ranger Regiment, but never applied. He went into Special Forces and was successful therein. But it was funny because I remember he put together like...
Sorry, shooting your coffee grinder is actually more elite than the Ranger Regiment. Army Rangers dream of being able to hit their coffee grinder successfully.
Yeah. For those of you who aren't familiar with the story, this is something that Milo loves. A guy in my unit who did go on to become a Special Forces officer tried to demonstrate the difference between double and single action on an M9 pistol to one of his soldiers, but forgot to clear the pistol beforehand or didn't know it was loaded and wound up shooting a coffee grinder in his office, just blasting it, eviscerating it. No one was hurt, but it was incredibly
one way
stupid.
To grind some coffee beans.
Exactly. You know what? I mean, why there should, if there is not already, be a veteran-owned coffee company where their whole point is we shoot every coffee bean we send you.
Just fucking unloading an AR-15 into a barrel. Exactly. It's like being hit by ricochets constantly, but you're not a fucking lib.
They roast the coffee, and then they put it in some sort of tank that they just blast with a 50 cal, and then that's how they grind the coffee. So
that would actually be cool.
This guy shot a coffee grinder. He also applied. I remember he was putting in a packet for Ranger Regiment, and like it was all of his materials were like written in pencil, and it looked like a first grader had written them. It was like,
you're just the kind of man we're looking for.
So the whole Tom Cotton thing isn't really all that much of a controversy to me. I mean, like, yeah, it's a question of terminology. His campaign team probably should have known better. He should have known better. The response was basically for him to be like, well, I'm more of a Ranger than you'll ever be, libs. I'm not joking. And then the Washington Free Beacon, which is like a right-wing hit piece, right-wing hit newspaper, published a hit piece about how the author who wrote that Tom Cotton piece is rich. Like, she has money.
Oh,
it's like, big fucking surprise. Who
cares?
I
mean, she works for an American newspaper. Like, what more do you need to know?
Yeah, she owns a townhouse in Georgetown or some shit. No one cares. Long story short, that's not anything you should really care about. It's not really a stolen valor thing. I mean, like, you could argue that Cotton should have known better, but this was also a long time ago, and Cotton loves to sort of play at people's lack of understanding of the distinction.
Whom among us has not, slightly faked an endorsement on LinkedIn?
Exactly, and it's one of those things for me too. Like people are like, well, Nate, were you a ranger? I was like, man, no. I went to ranger school because you're expected to as an infantry officer. Like it sucked. It's hard. Don't get me wrong, but it's very different than being in an actual ranger unit, which I was not. And also, I think I talked about this on Twitter. The distinction is a little bit different in the olden days because if you go back to like World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, ranger units existed, but they were basically components of regular units. Like you'd have like a ranger company in an infantry battalion. Or I think in some cases you might even have like a ranger platoon. So like it was you could be in a ranger unit by basically trying out for that unit without going to like some big selection. And ranger school got stood up in the Korean War, but like it just wasn't the same thing. Like the idea of the modern ranger regiment where like to be an NCO or an officer, you have to have a ranger tab and you have to try out for it. And if you're an officer, you have to leave the unit after being like a platoon leader or a company commander. And then if you want to come back for a higher position of authority, you have to try out again. Like, if you want to be a Ranger Battalion commander, it is actually possible that you have gone to the range. I think they called it RASP when I was in a Ranger Assessment Selection Program, or Ranger Orientation Program, ROPE, RASP, RIP, whatever the fuck they called it.
Yeah. Ripping ass.
Ripping ass, exactly. It's possible that you would have gone to it 4 times.
You have shot so many fucking coffee grinders by the time you're a lieutenant colonel in the Rangers.
Yeah, imagine basically like you have to go through whatever they call the selection program to be a platoon leader, and then to be a company commander, and then to be like a senior staff officer, and then to be a battalion commander. So like it's super selective, and Cotton didn't do that. So the big takeaway from this is just, is it important? No, not really. Does it matter? Nah, not really. And even if it was stolen valor, like people in Arkansas didn't elect Tom Cotton because they were really impressed by his military credentials. Like he's a right-wing shitlord who does right-wing shitlord stuff. Yeah. Like that's what matters.
He didn't lie about the things that matter, which is being a huge racist.
Exactly. Like he's a huge piece of shit, and everything he does is just like, own the libs, troll stuff, because that's what he got elected to do, because that's who the Republican Party is. Yeah. And people are worried that Cotton is going to be a presidential candidate. For one, everyone that I know who knows anything about Arkansas politics is like, Tom Cotton is in the closet, and everyone in Arkansas knows it. So like, granted, that hasn't been a huge problem for Lindsey Graham, but also Lindsey Graham has stayed a senator. He has not tried to become president. Similarly, Cotton will probably stay a senator because it's an incredibly powerful position, and you don't have to be the president. And your gravy train doesn't have to end after 4 or 8 years. Most likely, he wouldn't be successful anyway, and he doesn't have to worry about people digging in his private business. So there's that. The other is, Tom Cotton has so much negative charisma that he makes Ben Shapiro look like Barack Obama. Like, he is just a simpering slender man worm who's just like, I'll have you know I graduated from the Army's Ranger School. Like, he's just...
Let's just say, hypothetically, you're going to become the president.
Hypothetically, you're going to bust a nut.
Yeah.
Like, it's just that. Yeah, so the point...
Isn't he the birthday cake guy?
He is. Tom Cotton eats birthday cake every day. He, like, runs 20 miles a day and eats birthday cake. And he says that he met his wife.
Just carrying a little parcel of birthday cake on your like 22-mile run or whatever.
He says that he and his wife bonded over their shared love of birthday cake. Basically, he just like randomly went out and got married out of nowhere.
I'm curious as to like what he defines as birthday cake as opposed to like a regular... Because a birthday cake can really be any kind of cake, right? Like,
most people, I would say... And maybe I'm going out on a limb here to be like...
You're listening to The Baking Hour with Nate Bethea and Milo Edwards.
For me, I'm not 100% sure if I want to stand as the sole arbiter of what is and is not birthday cake. But...
We go live to this government press conference. Look, far be it from me to say to anyone what is and is not a birthday cake.
Hey, we can't even talk in Boris Johnson voice. He also eats birthday cake every day for breakfast.
Like what?
Boris Johnson eats birthday cake for breakfast.
What the fuck is... Okay, we're getting the red string out here. The pins are going in the board.
This is the thing. Boris Johnson eats birthday cake for breakfast every day. That is one of his things. Like he's just like, I'm a piece of shit and I like it.
Oh, he's David Baddiel.
yeah.
In the biopic of Boris Johnson's life, played by David Baddiel.
Yeah, he's so basically Tom Cotton, I would say, if I'm going to be the arbiter of birthday cake, attempt to be, if you didn't specify any other flavor, you just said birthday cake, then it would be a white cake with white frosting and like lots of frosting sprinkles and like colorful things on it, like balloons and shit on it. If you put a white cake in front of an American and you said this is a cake, they'd be like, yeah, it's a cake. But if it's a white cake with white frosting and like balloons made out of frosting on it, then it's a birthday cake. like to us.
See.
And if
yeah, but I guess balloons are a kind of
because it's appealing to your inner child and getting a balloon on your birthday, and that boy's got a bigger balloon than me, mummy, and stuff like that.
Birthday cake in Britain would most commonly be a chocolate cake.
I mean, it is a chocolate cake in the US too, but like when people say like a birthday cake flavored thing, it's always going to be like a white cake, like a vanilla cake. And yeah, white frosting, colorful stuff on the frosting, like something about it in the same way that like if you got like a birthday cake cupcake, it would 100% be blonde cake, white frosting, and some other shit on it.
Love a nice Aryan cake.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Tom Cotton likes things to be white and pure. So, and I'm not talking about cocaine. I'm talking about birthday cake. But yes, he's a huge freak. And
man, I'd like all these people so much more if they were into cocaine. That would be cooler.
It's just not a big thing in America for like, I mean, I guess maybe politicians in the olden days, but I just think that like the big difference with Coke in the US versus here is that the stakes are so much higher for getting caught with it. Like it's genuinely, I made the joke.
Especially in Arkansas, fucking hell.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. I made the joke about this on Britanology not that long ago that the reason why you don't necessarily have as much of like a profoundly open culture of talking about drugs in America the way that you do in Britain is because like in America, if like in Britain you have an illegal rave, they're like, oh, what's all this then? And then like, someone might get community service or something like that. Where in America, it's like, wait, you had ecstasy, you're going to jail for 50 years. Like the penalties are much stronger, but
very cool and normal.
But I think that like, it's sort of an understood thing that politicians do, but it's nowhere near as overt in America as it is in Britain. Whereas here, it's like everyone knows Boris Johnson loves cocaine, that like he's always doing cocaine. And like, that's not really a thing that anyone, there's not as much moralizing about it. If anyone's moralizing about people who use coke in the UK, they're always complaining about like, oh, those Guardian readers are so hypocritical. They like cocaine only if it comes from Waitrose. And it's just like, this country is like the drug takingest country I've ever been in my entire life. Like, it's not.
I think it would be fair to say, yes.
It's not just like a Guardian readers in London thing. It's literally everyone. Like, I've met people who are from,
mate, got any Charlie?
I've met people from Liverpool, which I guess in my mind I wouldn't think of as being like a huge drug taking city. They're like, no, everyone in Liverpool does coke. They just call it beak. So like,
call it beak. Wow,
I guess,
okay.
yeah. But apparently because of the port and like importation and stuff, like it's just very, very common. Yeah, it's yeah. So I guess the Northwest is also a drug taking place, not just the Southeast. So.
Oi mate, got any Charlie? The standard of the birds in here is outrageous.
I've
gotta say, this is the best night out in the Southeast.
One of the things that made me laugh about our trip to Liverpool before the event.
The event. Do not think about it. Yeah, it was like a year ago. Exactly.
More than a year. It was on Remembrance Sunday, 2019.
I thought it was January.
No, the election was still on, man. The election was on. It was because we were up there for Remembrance Sunday. Remember, like we saw all the dudes in like their old army regalia walking around and stuff, and like the girls coming from the 45-year-old women coming from the club in like leather skirts but wearing poppies. Like it was Remembrance Sunday. So we went up there, and it was funny to me because whenever the two of us would go up to a counter to ask for something, etc., if I asked the question, everyone was like, "Oh, he's young. What's he doing here? It's so nice." And if they're Irish for some reason,
half Irish, half Welsh,
and if Milo asks the exact same question in the exact same tone of voice, it was like, "Go back to fucking London, you fucking you fucking posh Southern Tory." Like it's just they hated you so much they couldn't fucking stand you, and I was just like, it's literally like. We're both up here doing a job, and we're literally the question is like, is there a parking lot?
Yeah. Like every time I was trying to deal with anyone, they were just being like so astonishingly rude, and I was like, "What? I'm just asking you a question, man."
Yeah, that's something that you do sort of have in America, but not to the same degree. Like if you had like,
I was also like wearing a fucking tracksuit.
Exactly.
How posh do you think I am?
I'm trying to be one of you. I'm trying to blend in.
If I was wearing like salmon chinos, I would have probably taken the L a bit more. But.
I would say that like if you're like my dad owns a dealership, kid where like you said, salmon shorts and boat shoes and like a tucked in, Oxford shirt or something. And you go to like dog shit Arkansas, South Georgia, and you like talk with an incredibly like you're stuck up to people, and you talk with like a very Yankee accent, like a very Northeastern American accent. People might be
like Branston.
Yeah. You're like Bryden or something like that. People might not take too kindly, but by and large, people are fine. Like it's just not the same. I've never seen. Put it this way: I've never seen white people immediately flip on other white people solely because of a difference in accent like that. That to me is... Now, I do think if you go to Boston...
Welcome to Britain.
If you were in Boston and you sounded like a New Yorker or something like that, then maybe some, idiot Bostonian would be like, say some shit to you. Like, like, say, get the fuck out of here. Yeah. But it's just not the same thing. And so, of course, we've gotten off topic talking about Britain.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to talk about Britain some anyway.
One of the things we wanted to talk about with regard to Britain was... So, Tom Cotton is an interesting point of entry, to me at least, because here's this guy...
Not only for birthday cake.
Exactly. Here's this guy who has his entire thing was, I was in the army. Like, he sells himself as the tough army guy who loved the army so much that he spent exactly the minimum amount of time one has to spend in as an officer when you go in via, I think, OCS.
Because if you spend any longer than that, it's sus.
Well, I mean...
you want to hang out with dudes for longer than the minimum required time?
Cotton went to Harvard, then went to Harvard Law, then joined the Army, was in for 4 years, made sure to do exactly one Iraq deployment, then got out, and then ran for office. So, like, I don't think... It's not particularly common for someone with those kinds of credentials to join the Army and then get out of the Army unless their sole purpose is to run for office, which is what he did. But he's always into like culture war, libs are disrespecting the troops kind of stuff, and has been from the get-go. Like Tom Cotton's whole thing is just being a huge piece of shit, like he always has been.
Yeah.
And what interests me about him is that I don't think you have as much of an analog of that here. You kind of do with guys like Johnny Mercer and Marc Francois, but they are so deeply British. That it's just not the same.
Even those two are so different from each other, though.
It's true, because Johnny Mercer was an officer in the regular army, I believe.
Yeah, like Johnny Mercer and Rory Stewart are kind of like your army Tories who were like, they were army infantry officers, like proper like Sandhurst guys, whatever. They're just like poshos who are like, yes, the blokes in Afghan, really teaches you the value of looking after your blokes,
Exactly.
And because the British way of doing it is that they spend all of their time like playing down the military service. It's like, listen, it was just a thing. I looked after the blokes. I did what I had to do out there. You understand? And the bit here, what I really want to talk about is widening the A36. But then you have like Marc Francois, who's like the occasional, because the first thing to point, because we've had this conversation with you before about how like, even though in America people like love the troops way more, there are certain aspects of the troops that people in Britain love more or like differently. Like if you were a regular soldier in Britain, like no one gives a fuck. But being an army officer in Britain is incredibly fancy. And if you were a British army officer, you can like breeze into like any fucking job you want, like being a fucking banker or a lawyer or whatever. They all like fall over themselves to hire like, Hugo from the Queen's Light Dragoon Lancers or whatever. Like, Yeah, so I was a captain and trained some Estonians, great bunch of lads, like that guy. He works at JP Morgan now. And so you don't see as many of them in politics, both because there's no need to do it to be a politician. People give very few fucks if you're in the army or not. And also because these people are constantly being handed like amazing, like fucking do nothing jobs.
Well, yeah, for one thing, the salary for an MP is about, if you're just a backbench MP and you're not in a ministerial position, is something, because unlike the US, I'm not 100% sure about this actually, but I don't think this is the case in the US. I don't think in the US you make more money if you're on like committees and stuff, if you're a congressperson. I genuinely think you just get paid the same. In the UK, like if you were a junior minister or you were a shadow minister or an actual minister of government, you make more than just a regular backbench MP. But a backbench MP, I think they just recently voted themselves a pay rise, so it's like £82,000 a year, which is a fuckload of money, don't get me wrong. That is so much more than the average. The average family income in the UK is like £28,000.
It's like nothing compared to what US politicians.
Yeah. I think US politicians make something like, I think a congressperson makes something like 140 or 160,000 a year, which is more than £82,000. Not that much more, but it's still more.
Yeah, and the cost of living is quite a lot lower in the US in general.
Yeah, I mean, obviously people. DC is not, but like those. Yeah,
but DC is a lot cheaper than London.
Yeah,
which
for sure.
Is where
And so the point being is that if you're the kind of guy who would be potentially in a position to get a job because of your military service like that, 82 grand is great, but you could get more working in finance. Even if you don't start at that more, like you could get more within a couple of years, you'd be making a lot more than that.
Because also it's important to bear in mind the way that Britain works, which is that like every single army officer, to be an army officer at all in Britain, every single one of them has to go to the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. That is the only way you can do it. So they all fucking know each other. And like, who do you meet at Sandhurst? You meet fucking Hugo and Tarquin, whoever the fuck. And then when you get out of the army, Hugo and Tarquin, who are your big mates from like the Household Cavalry or whatever, are all working at fucking JP Morgan or whatever, because that's where their dad works, who was also in the fucking Household Cavalry, which is the reason why they were even let into the Household Cavalry in the first place. And so then mysteriously you have all these people who can get you a job somewhere, right? Like, it's the tale as old as time.
I think it's one of the weirdest things about the UK that you'll find is that people, you know, if you have a regular job, especially outside of London, you know, if you have like a salary job, not a wage job, not like a 0 hours contract, if you have a salaried job and you're outside of the home counties, even in the home counties, but just not within London itself, if you're making like 22 grand a year, like, you're doing pretty well for yourself. That's a pretty typical entry level white collar salary.
Yeah.
Whereas like, if you work in finance, if you work in consulting, if you work at a multinational, if you get recruited from abroad, the salaries here are shockingly high. I mean, there was a thing recently, I want to say, it wasn't even in like Tatler, I swear it was in like the Times. It was talking about like, you know, how do people deal with like, you know, managing their finances. Here's an example of someone like managing their finances or something like that. And it was genuinely someone who worked as like a project manager for a major bank or something like that. She was 28 and she was making £150,000 a year. Like, her take home pay was like £7,900 a month. And it's just like, what the fuck? I mean, what the fuck do you do with that kind of money? I mean, obviously, I know what I do with that kind of money. I buy more expensive wood products.
First of all, you build a big fucking sledging ramp out of cocaine in the back of your house. That's what you do first of all, mate. So if you need any more consultancy on this, let me know.
Yeah, it's funny for me because like, I'm not I've been very open about the fact that I'm not a particularly big drug user. I just like smoking weed, and weed's not particularly expensive, and I don't smoke that much, so I don't really have a drug budget. I never have. But yeah, obviously, you would imagine when someone's like, what is a 28-year-old making who has £7,900 a month in London? What do they do with cocaine?
Yeah, that is
a lot of it.
That is what they fucking do.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where, yeah, like you were saying, the money isn't like, because obviously being a politician in America, like, the money is good. Once you've been elected and you've served out a term, you get like all the benefits, like the health benefits they get like for life. So you're you basically you get the Swedish healthcare basically from the fucking US government for the rest of your life. Also, having been a person in...
What if a Swedish guy was American?
Exactly. Yeah, he would be from North Dakota and he'd have COVID. The thing about it is, once you've been a congressperson, you know, you have all these other opportunities. You can like join a board of things. You get paid to do shit, get paid to give speeches, get paid to do whatever the fuck. Like, you've got an in for all sorts of craziness like that will pay you really well.
Yeah, and in Britain, you go work for an arms company. That's usually what happens.
Apparently, yeah.
Invariably.
Well, it's funny that you should mention that, because that's genuinely what happened. If you remember, about this time 2 years ago, a bunch of idiots from the Labour Party split off to form the independent group Change UK.
How did that go?
They all lost their seats because they were all a bunch of beige, do-nothing MPs. But almost all of them have gone on to work as like political communications consultants for multinationals and stuff, where like they're being paid to consult on like the communication strategy for like the Saudi military or something like that.
Who are great, by the way.
Yeah, don't do anything wrong. They've never committed any more crimes.
Don't look into those guys, because they're doing fine.
Yeah. We actually we have a trade name for them. Like, it's too long and cumbersome to say the military of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, so we just say No War Crimes Here Incorporated.
That's right.
Everyone knows them that way.
Yeah, they're actually currently in a lawsuit with BlackRock over who came up with that name first. Sorry, Blackwater, not
BlackRock too. I mean, in their own.
BlackRock are like more steps removed from the war crimes, but Blackwater are like direct. They're right there.
Yeah, exactly.
They're on the front line. They're not, like, BlackRock are the Pogues of war crimes.
Yeah, exactly. The rear echelon war crimes people. And that's one of those things that's made me laugh. Is
BlackRock have got the tab, but they were never in the regiment.
Yes, exactly. No fake fucking Rangers here. So one of the things that is interesting to me, though, is like you brought up Johnny Mercer as this kind of guy who's like, So you do have...
He now serves on the front lines of the Defending My Wife battalion.
So famously, Johnny Mercer is an MP for Plymouth.
The Queen's first Borat guards.
So let's take a minute for a second. Before we talk about Johnny Mercer in the Plymouth Herald's comment section, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the city Plymouth? Because
An absolute shithole,
Mm-hmm.
number one, and number two, the Royal Marines Commando Training Center.
I was going to say, because like if I understand this correctly, Plymouth is a relatively grim city on the southern coast that also has a huge Royal Navy presence.
Yeah.
And
Wait, hang on. Was Johnny Mercer at Greenlid?
I don't know. I just know he was an army officer. I'm pretty sure Mercer was an artillery officer.
Because I'm just going to check this, just because if he was a Marines officer, that's a whole different kind of crazy. It's an army artillery unit that is under the command of 3 Commando Brigade Royal Marines. So it's the Royal Marines artillery, but it's part of the army. So it's like an army unit that's attached.
So
to
he's like he's like task organized to the Royal Marines.
So that explains why he's ended up in fucking Plymouth. But he went to Sandhurst, which means he's the army kind of crazy. Because like generally speaking, in my experience, like the Marines officers aren't as fancy, because to become an army officer, you have to go to Sandhurst, and it's all very, I mean, it's fucking insane, but it's all like extremely traditional, like wearing red coats and all that shit. Whereas Royal Marines officer training is much more like what you described Ranger School being like, which is basically except it's longer. It's like a year and a half of them just like brutalizing you. But at Royal Marines officer training, no one wears rank, and you get put in with the enlisted men, like for most of your training. Like you do some separate officer shit too, but like it's like they call it like the command wing or whatever. Whereas like if you're at Sandhurst, like you're not going to see an enlisted man until you're already like a commissioned officer. Apart from, Sergeant Bollocks, who is like constantly hazing you, like, this is a new bit we've been doing on the stream, which is, I don't know how this came up. Riley and I were talking about it because my mate Tom from Cambridge has gone to Sandhurst now, who you've spoken to before.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like super nice, so I just kind of wonder how the fuck he's getting on. He is kind of fancy, but I worry. He's a small boy, and he just reminded me about like insane British sergeant majors, and so we've been doing this bit where it's just like, men, it is 4 o'clock in the morning. You are going to be using the end of your penises to rub shoe polish onto your boots. It's that kind of like, what happens at Sandhurst is you get woken up at a random time of the night, and a guy with like full sleeve tattoos on both arms forces you to do a task in a really impractical way as punishment for something you did badly 3 days ago.
It makes me laugh because, so West Point works differently than Sandhurst in that, as I understand it,
it's a degree, whereas Sandhurst is like, it's just military training.
It's just military training. Yeah, whereas like for the U.S. Army, you can become a commissioned officer by going the way that I did, which is just do an ROTC program at a civilian university, or go to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, or go to a military academy that's not the official one, but it's still like a military school, like the Virginia Military Institute or the Citadel or Norwich or places like that. And so what makes me laugh about this is that it does seem as though the British Army and the British Army Officer Corps is like a good preview of what the U.S. military would look like if only West Point grads basically were officers. However, West Point actually recruits people who aren't rich. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like West Point actually does a much better job of that because like it's run by the Army and it's not just recruiting the fancy lads.
So does Sandhurst. This is the thing. Because at Sandhurst, there are 2 different kinds of Sandhurst guys, as far as I can tell. Now, I primarily know one type of Sandhurst guy.
You went to Cambridge, so like, the guys...
you're right. You have got your posho Queen and Country Sandhurst guy who's like, well, the father was in the Royal Artillery, so I suppose, might as well do a short commission like that kind. That's like a whole fucking thing. Like it is my job to get my leg blown off in service of Queen and Country because that's what grandfather did. Like that fucking shit. The James Blunt types. But then you also have the Britain has this amazing thing where basically to get any kind of like functioning job in this country, like a white collar job, you have to get a 2-1 from university. And if you get a 2-2, there are like only 2 like kind of functionally white collar jobs that you can really get, which are school teacher and army officer. And so Sandhurst is basically half like Cambridge and Oxford guys who are like, well, I suppose one might serve Queen and Country for once. And then half guys who are like, well, I got a 2-2 from Leeds Metropolitan, so I thought, fuck it, the army. Like that's that's basically the because you can go to Sandhurst without a degree, but it's like very rare, and you basically have to have been at public school, more or less. And so, like, yeah, you get this. There's this like weird tension between. I watched a documentary about Sandhurst once, and there was this like really weird bit where they showed them all a bunch of like home videos this guy who'd commissioned out of Sandhurst recently had made while he was there, like how he was getting on, with the blokes and all that. And then they just showed a video of him getting killed in Afghanistan, like fucking like head cam footage from like his platoon sergeant of him just getting fucking shot. And then they were like, this is actually Sandhurst are showing this. This isn't the film crew showing it to them. And then the film crew were doing like interviews with and there was like a posho guy who was like, yeah, just really brings it all home, how important it is, what we do here, what a serious matter it really is, and how you've got to take care of the blokes out there. And then they cut to one of the like, leads 2-2 guys who's like, yeah, you can get fucking killed.
I mean,
every British Army officer is like one of those
one
two
or the
guys.
other, yeah. You know what kills me? I American listeners might not know the James Blunt story. That not only was James Blunt an Army officer, but he might have single-handedly prevented a confrontation between NATO and the Russian military in 1999.
Yeah, according to him, he prevented World War III.
Because basically, he was an Army officer.
He was in the Household Cavalry.
And they were in Kosovo.
Point of information, Household Cavalry, the absolute fanciest regiment in the British Army. To get into the Household Cavalry, basically someone in your family has to have been in it. And the reason they've been in it is because they're a fucking aristocrat. Like, James Blunt is like his actual name is James Blount, and he's like a marquis or something, or like an earl. Like, yeah.
Yes.
He is extremely posh, and there's an amazing video of him somewhere on the internet where they're doing a tour of the Household Cavalry barracks in London. So they're like fucking doing dressage with a sword in front of Buckingham Palace, those motherfuckers. And they're the fanciest tier of those guys. And then he's showing them around the barracks, like this like BBC team or whatever. And he's talking in such like British Army officer English that it's genuinely comedic. He's like, "Hello, I'm Captain James Blunt." Like, to the point where like they're saying each individual word so quickly that you're not quite sure what they've said. Like that, powerful.
I just find it very funny because in that situation, the Russian military basically did a convoy to like go take over the Pristina airport, and I believe it was Wesley Clark, but it might have been somebody else who was the American commanding general who basically ordered the forces on the ground to fire on them. And James Blunt was one of the officers on the ground who's like, No, I will not. And so yes, the guy who wrote the guy who sang "You're Beautiful" might have also prevented World War III. We don't know because it's been filtered through so many layers of British myth-making.
It's such a funny story, that because of the way it's told, because fucking General Sir Mike Jackson was involved in that, because he was James Blunt's commander, but he was like out of the chain of command because James Blunt was the like officer commanding on the ground, and he was reporting to this American general. And so then this American general is like, "You're going to attack this airfield that's being held by the Russian Spetsnaz," and he's like, "Well, I'm not bloody doing that." And so he phones up Mike Jackson, who then supposedly also, according to his own myth making, phoned him up and said, "Listen, if you're going to start World War III, you can do it with your own bloody men, all right?"
That sounds about right. I mean, what can you say? But that's the thing, isn't it? Like, that's the fancy type of British politician who was in the military. Johnny Mercer, who then also
Rory Stewart walking across Afghanistan.
Rory Stewart was in Afghanistan. He didn't serve in Afghanistan in the military. He had been an infantry officer. He decided to do like a personal ethnologue.
IED, pray love.
Yeah. Well, that was before IEDs were a thing, because it was actually before the Iraq War. He walked across Afghanistan in like 2002. He then was like an administrator for the British civilian equivalent of the fucking CPA or whatever in Iraq post-invasion, basically like managing a province because he was just getting to live out his, Rory of Arabia fantasies.
Wearing a big fucking turban and like smoking hookah through an extremely long pipe.
Yeah, famously, Rory Stewart was awkwardly made to admit that while he was in Afghanistan, he attended a wedding, and like it was just sort of ceremonial custom that he also smoke opium with everybody who was there. And so there was like a little mini debate about that. Like, not really.
What I absolutely love about Tories is that the thing they're most ashamed of is invariably the coolest thing they've ever done. Like, oh, yes, I suppose I did smoke opium at an Afghan wedding. Like, that's a good story.
That fucking rules.
That's the only thing I like about you, Rory Stewart.
So one thing that I found really funny about this, though, also is, Johnny Mercer famously got mad at somebody on Twitter. And now this is an MP, right? Now, this is the thing you'll notice. British MPs will just get at it online in a way.
They are on fucking line.
They control their social media and get at it in a way that like very few American politicians do. Like
they don't have a budget for a social media manager. Like they're fucking in there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, right? Like I can't remember. Okay, have you ever seen the senator from Iowa, Chuck Grassley?
No, but that's a hell of a name.
He's deranged. He uses his own Twitter. He refuses to hand it off to someone. He doesn't believe. He would rather do weird abbreviations than do multiple tweets. So he'll do these insane tweets. Like there was one about like, was driving Route 9 through Iowa last night, dark, snowy, found a deer collided with side of car, had to keep driving, assumed deer dead. Like that's like not verbatim, but
why are you posting this?
Assume deer dead is 100% a line he did tweet in one of his tweets. He just tweets the most deranged shit. And he's the only American politician I can think of who really gets at it in the mentions the way that it seems like just about every fucking British MP does. Like,
I mean, Jess Phillips was in your mentions.
Jess Phillips was in my mentions because I made fun of her. Jess Phillips is famous for being a TERF and having like encouraged people to pile on abuse to the first black female MP when she was serving as a shadow minister for Corbyn. But she also pretended that she was really impressed by the American poet Amanda Gorman. She was so impressed.
Like, you weren't impressed. It was a bad poem.
She was so impressed by it that she got her name wrong and praised Amanda Gordon. And I made fun of her for this, and she got really mad at me and got in my mention. Now, this is an MP. This is literally the member of parliament for Birmingham Yardley. And yet she's like that. Another MP who's constantly online is the former Ilford South, I believe, MP, Mike Gapes. Great name, great guy.
Great name, great guy, loves milk.
He loves milk. He looks like, the best way I could describe it is if a wizard learned how to cast a spell called Ugly and he cast it on Bernie Sanders, then he would look like Mike Gapes.
And also made Bernie Sanders like gain his entire body weight.
Yeah,
again.
he's easily twice the weight of Bernie Sanders. He's a very rotund, jolly man, bald, bespectacled. Talks like this and gets very upset about Mr. Seamus Milne. Like he's just he's got a very strange voice. Like he's the kind of guy that could only exist in Britain and be a politician in Britain.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's just some random no mark that got installed by Blair, and like he.
It's a bit like if you'd put one of those like cursed British children's cartoons from the 80s into like reactor number 4 at Chernobyl. Like he's what would have emerged.
So. You've got, like British MPs will get into it. That's the thing, right? Like they will get into it online.
They love to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing about it is, if you send a letter, like an inquiry to like your congressperson or your senator in America, you'll get back like a form letter about like, actually we believe markets are the most important thing, and that's like, thus, we don't want to be slaves to the communist impulses of healthcare. But you'll get a form letter or some bullshit response from like an intern with swoopy hair named like Bryson or something like that.
Yeah.
Whereas like. Genuinely, if you send an email like to your Tory MP being like, I want you to support free school meals for children, they'll be like, well, if they don't starve to death, how will they ever learn? And like, you'll get that reply from one like, I don't believe in the cultural Marxism of feeding children. That sounds like Stalin. You'll genuinely get that response in your email from the MP himself.
Oh, Nate, do you know what's even funnier about that? Is that is their form letter. Like that is like that, like that. The emails, that is an intern sending those, and that's what they've been instructed to reply. Like on Twitter, they're personally getting into it, but the emails is like that is actually going through a system, and it's still deranged.
So the thing that I would say is it's funny that this is a phenomenon that they get into it. So Johnny Mercer, former Army officer, now MP for Plymouth. He
representative for blokes everywhere.
He replied to someone who was making fun of him on Twitter by saying, answer me, are you or are you not the same person who has been insinuating that my wife is a prostitute in the comments section of the Plymouth Herald?
So good.
Now,
poetry, it's a haiku.
To an anonymous account on Twitter. Now, the thing that I would say is that, for one, if you thought this was the person, like, why would you call attention to it?
Yeah.
The Streisand effect has never registered in the mind of Tory MPs.
It's just made everyone immediately pile into the Plymouth Herald comments section in search of who's been insinuating Johnny Mercer's wife as a prostitute.
They want to see the comments. They want to get the dirt on Johnny Mercer's wife. Another thing that I find really funny is, you find people like this, but when I think about, are there any former British Army officers who are sane, who are in politics? I mean, Clive Lewis is okay. He was an Army officer. I think he was an infantry officer. He was definitely an officer in the British Army, and then became an MP for Norwich North, I think.
Yeah,
North,
he's a Norfolk guy, yeah.
Yeah. But like, and he was like to the left of the party. The thing about Lewis was that kind of like made him a little. I mean, he's just kind of he can do dumbass things. Like he's gotten himself in like stepping on rake kind of scandals that like.
I mean, he's all right, but he was still in the army. I mean, come on,
Yeah, I mean, they were doing something about because Britain being the most just fucking most bad faith, the least honest political media climate. There was some event where they were like making fun of somebody like who had to be apologized, and Clive Lewis was like, "Yeah, on your knees, bitch," and like that's funny, but that's kind of more like what you would say around your soldiers than what you say as a politician. So of course the bad faith brigade was like, oh, proof again that Labour are misogynistic. And so Lewis, like, can he be kind of a dumbass? Sure, but like he's relatively sound. He went really, really hardcore remain in the EU, even when that was obviously a political liability. So like, whatever.
And to be fair, like I think again, this is where I think Britain departs a bit from the US, which is that like your British army officers are like somewhat insane. But because of the way that they are like trained and expected to behave, like you'll often find that like your Tory MPs who have been proper army officers are less insane than the average Tory MP because they're the only one of them who's ever worked with working class people for a kickoff.
Yeah, for sure.
And so like a lot of them have quite like what you might call like paternalistic attitudes towards working class people because like being an army officer sort of fosters that. But like most of them you can at least see have some kind of interest in the welfare of working class people, even if it's misguided. Like someone like Rory Stewart is like, he's definitely on the lib end of like he would be a medium Democrat in the US.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like your American like army politicians tend to be your like most reactionary ones.
Well, you've got guys like Dan Crenshaw, who was a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
You've got guys like on the Democrats.
Dan Crenshaw is fucking amazing, man.
Oh yeah, he's
that advert where he is halo jumping in to fight Antifa in a field. I didn't even know where to begin with that one. I won't lie to you.
He's such an intense guy, and he also. The reason why he has a safe seat is because his seat is so incredibly gerrymandered, like for all like the bougiest suburbs of Houston, I believe. It might be Dallas, but I think it's Houston. Similarly, you've got MP or not MPs. I was going to say MPs. You got Congress people in the U.S. who are Democrats who were in the military. You've got guys like I think Connor Lamb, who is like a conservative Democrat. You've got a guy whose name I always forget, who's a congressman from Massachusetts, who's like to the right of Pelosi by a significant margin. Seth Moulton, that's his name.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
he's like very pro gun control, but like very, very anti. The best way I could describe it is he's the kind of person who'd be like, us supporting Black Lives Matter cost us votes, and it's just like, fuck off. That kind of guy. You don't really have a lot of left wing. Like, you don't really have a Clive Lewis equivalent in America. People would sometimes bring up Tammy Baldwin, but she's actually kind of center right of the party. She was a Blackhawk pilot and got shot down and like lost both her legs. And she's gay, and so like she is definitely hailed as sort of like a lib icon for veteran politicians, but she's actually not particularly left. Lee Carter is, but Lee Carter is an assemblyman from Virginia, so like he's a state representative. Like, he's not even at the federal level. And then you've also got guys like, I mean, in the U.S., for example, you had one of the 2016 primary candidates was a guy named Jim Webb, who was a senator from Virginia, I believe, and like on the campaign trail basically was like, I killed a man in Vietnam and it was good. I'm glad I did it. Like insane shit. So, and that's a Democrat.
Hell, that wasn't even during the war. I was just on holiday. $500, you can kill anything you like out there.
So yeah, long story short, you don't really have the deep levels of crazy. I mean, when you get into stuff like ex-army, there's a guy whose name escapes me who's like a state legislator in far eastern Washington. Like, and Eastern Washington is very, very redneck and crazy and like prepper, whereas like Western Washington is obviously like Seattle and Olympia and like very, very liberal by comparison. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. We've talked about him on the show before. He's like a full-on Christian dominionist, like tells all his people, like basically like belongs to like a polygamy church, tells his people to like stock up on weapons to kill Antifa, like completely insane. Like, he basically believes like a Christian government needs to be installed that will kill all Antifa and stop women from voting, like deranged. But that is more, if I remember correctly, he was an officer in the National Guard.
So now we're into Marc Francois kind of guys.
Exactly, because there's two people that I believe we should talk about very quickly who were in the Territorial Army, the British equivalent of the National Guard.
Yeah.
They were officers in the Territorial Army. They are Sebastian Gorka, who, despite being a member of...
Join me in the village hall for the weekly drill.
Despite being the man who was in the Viteschi Ren or whatever, like Nightmare Dracula order that he's a member of in Hungary, whose father is obviously like an insane right-wing Hungarian figure, Sebastian Gorka is a British citizen.
Was he in the Territorial SAS?
Yes. Not the SAS. He was he was an intelligence officer in the Territorial Army.
Right, okay.
And then so people on this show will know Sebastian Gorka because he's a huge loser, because he was a lecturer at the U.S. Army Special Forces School. I don't know why.
Yeah.
People know him because
Questions abound.
he has the smallest engine version of a Ford Mustang with license plates that read Art and War. And he likes to park it without a permit. He's on TV a lot. He's got a huge head. He sells brain pills.
He does have a really big head. Maybe it's from all the brain pills.
Maybe. But it's funny because when you see his photos from the Territorial Army, he's like way skinnier and younger and just looks like a
Same
big
size
nerd.
head.
But now his head doesn't even look that big. You genuinely think he's put on weight on his head. I don't know how this is possible. It's not supposed to happen, but it has.
My brain has expanded. What about yours?
So Sebastian Gorka and then Marc Francois. And now, Milo, you know a lot about the Marc Francois mythos.
Marc Francois, man. I mean, like, we respect short kings on this show. Marc Francois, extremely short king. I mean, we're talking like 5'5", 5'6" at a push. Like, he's a small guy. He is from Rayleigh in Essex. Which I think the technical socioeconomic description of Rayleigh would be an absolute fucking shithole. It is like Rayleigh is where Baz is from.
Gotcha.
Like it is Baz Central, Baz fucking Vegas. That is. Wait,
Rayleigh. Worse than Basildon, worse than the original Baz Vegas.
Oh, it's worse than Basildon, yeah, because Rayleigh is like Basildon is like a decent sized town. It's like 100,000 people. Like whereas fucking Rayleigh is like a small town with the same vibe. Yeah, it's cursed. It's like, I don't know, the British equivalent of somewhere in like Goomba, New Jersey, like where just like everyone thinks they're a New Yorker, but they're not. Like that, it's that kind of like psyche.
Essex Township, New Jersey.
Yeah.
Which is real. There is an Essex Township in New Jersey, believe it or not.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I always say this to people. I'm like, Essex is British New Jersey. Like that's what you need to understand. Like everyone there, it's like, it's close enough to London that like everyone who lives in Essex, or at least in like South Essex, is like they're like London people. Like their grandparents are all from London. Like they've just been pushed out over time, and so they all talk like fucking geezers, and they all think they're working class, even though they own like a plumbing company and make like £100,000 a year. Like it's the two white Range Rovers with the number plates that say working and class. Like that's that is the guy. And so Marc Francois is one of these like guys who is like rich, but definitely like aesthetically working class in the sense that he refuses to learn things, which again in Britain is very important to understand that like in Britain you have economic class, which no one pays attention to, and then you have like what social class you're in, which is basically determined by how willing you are to learn things. Like if you refuse to ever know anything, then you're working class. If you like are prepared to like pretend to be fancy, then you're
this is sort of, I mean, this is as determined by, I would say, not like any kind of diktat, but just the insane culture wars that are constantly going on in Britain, which a guy who makes 200 grand a year, fixing roofs is going to be portrayed as an everyman, whereas like a person who has a university degree but makes like £18,000 a year is, a posh wanker who's fucking putting on airs, who's like, a latte liberal trying to fucking...
Yeah, the middle class barista. Yeah.
Middle class barista. The other day, actually, this is funny. The other day, we were doing a thing on Britanology, and I think we were doing a part where we were pretending to be the cops, and reflexively, I just said something, and I didn't do it in like affected British accent. I just spoke as if I had a British accent. I'm like, oh God, it's happening.
It's finally getting to you, man.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. Like basically, middle class baristas, working class plumbing business owners with homes worth £750,000 kind of thing. Like that's this dynamic that you're seeing. Yeah,
it's amazing the way in this country it's like completely normal for people who are like millionaires to talk to people who earn like £18,000 a year, like they're Lord Fauntleroy, because they are not ashamed of having read a book. Like it is like this country is diseased. Like, but yeah, so Marc Francois is of that. And Marc Francois, like a lot of those kind of guys, has the kind of like dad Rambo energy. Like he has no interest in actually being in the army because that would be hard and involve not being he's the boomer who wishes he fought in World War II, but he doesn't wish he actually fought in World War II. He wants to do just enough to pretend that he fought in World War II. So if you want to do that, the Territorial Army, and particularly being an officer in the Territorial Army, is an easy way to like, no one really understands what the Territorial Army does. Like in the US, like the National Guard like does stuff.
Yeah,
like
they're the army of the state they're from, and like although they do get deployed in support of federal stuff, they also get deployed to like sandbag rivers in the state that they're from.
Yeah, that kind of shit. Whereas like the Territorial Army doesn't really we will deploy the regular army to do that, but you rarely see the TA doing that. Unless it's like some very specific part of the TA. Like you'll have like TA bomb disposal and stuff. So like they might get deployed sometimes, but like, yeah, generally speaking, and becoming an army officer in the TA is like much easier than becoming a regular army officer. You only have to do like 2 weeks of actual like Sandhurst, and it's like they just fucking let anyone do it. Like they don't really give a fuck. Like real like guys who would have failed the selection to become army officers like make it as TA officers.
This is me becoming a TA officer as a bit.
I know this, in fact, because someone I know from Cambridge who was too physically weak to become a regular army officer then became a TA intelligence officer and works at the Foreign Office. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was in the security services, but that's
if Milo disappears next week with no explanation.
Oh man, if I get murdered by that guy, that would be so funny. That would be the funniest way to go. He's like 5'6".
Short kings represent, you know.
Short kings fucking represent. That's our grand theory of the TA is everyone is 5'6", and furious. And so Marc Francois is like a huge, like he's as close to Britain gets as like Dan Crenshaw, except if Dan Crenshaw was like also a pogue.
Yeah,
like,
had never been a SEAL, had never been active duty. Yeah, was
like
just...
he's pretending to be in the army. He's like that episode of Extras where they have Ross Kemp on it, and Ross Kemp's character in Extras is like pretending that he was really in the SAS because he was on that show about the SAS. And then they're like, if you were really in the SAS, like what does it stand for? And he was like, Super Army Soldiers. Like that's basically Marc Francois. Like he's like a huge Brexit guy. He said something about sending gunboats to Belgium because they were like holding up the Brexit negotiations. Like my man like lives on the moon. Like his consciousness is somewhere like out of our galaxy. And yeah, he is as close as you get to your like Republican, like the fucking troops. When I was killing children in Afghanistan, no one asked me what my gender was. Like he's that guy. Except he's never even been to Afghanistan.
Yeah, he's never deployed.
My man has never even killed a child, and he's trying to steal valor. You see, he's trying to steal valor from people who have actually done the groundwork in murdering children, and I think that's disgusting.
Well, you know who I think would be a great person to ask about this topic? I feel like when we want to consult on the psyche of British guys who really wish they'd fought in World War II, it's always important to ask someone who's fought in literally every war in the last 100 years, Jerk Vanderklerk. So I was wondering, do you have him on speed dial?
I've been doing a little bit of consulting with the various wars.
Do you have him on speed dial? Could you bring him up to discuss?
What you've got to remember about war crimes is it's only a crime if it's illegal. Okay. And what I can tell you about the parts of the Central African Republic is there's not very much in the way of legal scholarship. Okay. You can more or less recruit people at will. The main problem you have with the kind of effective war fighting there is birds. The birds can cause a lot of problems with landing in Antonov in the middle of the jungle. You get birds in the engine, birds in the propellers. It's not very good. But you know, guys like Marc Francois, we rely on them. They're very short, so when they're in the trenches, you can't shoot them in the head. It's very important. Otherwise, you're bending over the whole time. Very uncomfortable. Bad for your lumbar.
Well, thank you, Jerk. I know that everyone will appreciate getting a chance to hear from you on this.
He's great, that guy. He's always happy to dial in.
Well, so Milo, we're coming to the end, so I just want to say thank you for helping me clarify because, my God, I feel like every time we do this, I realize how little I actually know about what makes this place tick.
Yeah, I mean, I will clarify that, like, my qualifications here is having lived in Britain my entire life and having met a lot of these people, but, like, most of what I've said is, like, based on vibes. It's, like, based on the people I've met and what I reckon about them. I'm not really, like, a military expert or anything like that, but just, like, I know my types of guy.
Of course, yeah.
I've met a lot of types of guy. We've all seen them. So if you want to know about types of guy in Britain, I'm always
I
here.
fucking hate it, man. It's just one of those things where I never would have guessed I would have gotten it so wrong, because I moved here and I was like, oh man, I saw the 2017 election. Like, I think Britain's really going to change. Britain's like on its way to being something very different than like the country my mom described as being when she was a kid and having gone back as an adult. It was like, no. Britain remains eternal. It will always be completely fucking insane.
This is why Britain and America have a special relationship, because they're the two most insane countries in the world.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you helping me clarify it. Just FYI, this week's bonus, Francis spoke to someone who is a Navy officer in active duty Navy and then reserve Navy, has talked a bunch about the experience of being trained by the Navy and what it's like being on a ship. And guess what? It fucking sucks. So if you want to hear about how much it sucks to be on a boat for 6 months at a time, there's a link in the show notes for the Patreon. It's at the $5 tier, and you'll get all the bonus content at the $5 tier that we've ever put out in the last 4 years we've been doing the show, because it's been we started it as a reaction to the whole Trump thing. And
you see, if this was a British podcast, right now is about when you'd be quitting and getting a job in finance.
Exactly, I know. Yeah. I burnished my credentials. It's just that I've told all of the.
I served in the Queen's first podcasting brigade.
Yeah, exactly. The problem that I have is that you're far more likely to get a job and get advanced in the veteran world if you're on the side of someone like Tom Cotton. And my only relationship with Tom Cotton is that I've been in his mentions telling him to eat birthday cake out of my ass for like 4 years now. So I can't really parlay that into a job opportunity.
Tom, why do you refuse to do it? You like birthday cake, you like ass.
Why not combine them? Two great tastes together at
once. Truly, has science gone too far?
So anyway, look for that the Navy-themed bonus if you're a Patreon subscriber. Thank you for listening. And
if you're a YMCA fan, tune in for that.
Yeah, hell yeah. We will talk to you next week.
Yeah, catch you later.